Greetings and welcome back. We've got our camp in place, we have our hot springs in place, we got our little tunnel in place. Now I'd like to move on to weather effects. And this is going to open up kind of a can of worms where we've got to start taking a look at particles. Now, particles are a way in which you can create a variety of different effects. I mean, to name just a few, you have things like smoke, fire, explosions, snow, rain, sleet, dust, anything that is particular, anything that is made of tiny little motes of something, or sometimes even large motes of something, is done with a particle effect. So that's how we're going to be handling our snow. It's also how we're going to handle our campfire a little bit later on, as well as a steam effect that will be rising off the surface of our little hot springs over here in the corner. So, without any further ado, let's take a look at making things snow. Actually, there is going to be some ado. I noticed in the last video that for some random reason I have a tree growing right in the middle of our path, and it confused me. I actually didn't know that I should be turning that way. So let me take just a second and fix that. So I'll select my terrain, and I'll grab the tree painting system and make my brush a whole lot smaller. And we'll just hold down Shift and make that one tree go away. So I just chopped down that tree, pulled out its trunk, and there we go. So now we want to create some form of snow system. Now, fortunately, inside of our standard assets, let me go ahead and just close everything back up. If we expand standard assets, we already have the particles loaded up. It's one of the things we loaded up as a part of our initial project. And if we expand this, there's all sorts of stuff to play with. And I'm sure most of you are already looking at the fire. I'm actually going to hold off on the fire, just, well, to torture the pyromaniacs amongst you. So you have dust, you have fire, you have miscellaneous effects, smoke, you have sparkles, you have water. What I'm going to do is come under miscellaneous, and see one of the things listed is a light snow. How convenient. So let's grab the light snow, and we'll just drag it right up here into the level, and then we'll hit F and frame up on it. And here it is. As a matter of fact, just because it's funny, let's go ahead and hit play. And then run over to this thing. And there you go. It's snowing. Just right there in that one little spot. Which doesn't do us a whole lot of good.
And those are some really, really big snowflakes.
There's some really huge snowflakes. But we'll get to that. We'll deal with all of that. We're going to take this little tiny effect and we're going to customize it to give us the effect that we're looking for. So just starting off with a basic snow is nice, but we're going to make it a lot nicer for our project. So first off, let's select our light snow. I'm going to take my hierarchy panel and start closing some stuff up here that I don't really need to be looking at. So that looks a lot nicer. Now let's take our light snow and we can move the whole effect up into the air. Now notice you don't see anything except the particles really just kind of being spawned out into the world. And getting them up off the terrain has helped us to really see these things a lot better. Now, you gotta kind of think about, our clouds are infinitely far away. So if you're still kind of stuck in the real world mentality of you need to have these things spawning from the altitude of the clouds, one, you'll never get there, and you really don't want to do that anyway because it takes a long time to get get the particles to fall from really far away. But we do need to get these kind of up above all of the places the player can go. We don't want the player to ever be able to see what we see right now, which is the particles kind of spawning out of midair from edge on. It looks really weird and it's really disconcerting. So if we knew that the player could get like maybe up here onto this ridge, for instance, then we might want to move this even higher. I'm going to go with right about here for now, and then if we want to move it up higher later, we can do that. Now, how do we edit the particle system to go from this really basic snow, which isn't very useful to us, to something that is a bit more useful? Well, this has to do with changing the various properties that are included with the components that make up a particle system. And that was a really long sentence. So let's look at it from a kind of a more broken down aspect. We brought in this light snow prefab. This prefab is a particle system that's made of just a few components, and I'd like to go ahead and just point those out to you. And we'll talk a lot more about these components in particular when we get to the actual video section specifically over particles. But we have an emitter, we have an animator, and we have a renderer. The emitter fires particles into the scene so that we can have them. The animator changes those particles over time. And then the renderer shows us the particles. That's really all there is to it. That's the basics of it. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that our particles are emitted over a much larger area. So let's start there. That's going to be inside of our ellipsoid particle emitter. And we're going to start with the ellipsoid itself. So down here at the bottom, we have the ellipsoid settings. If we expand this, this allows us to control the scale of the ellipsoid shape that is emitting our particles. Currently, it's 10 by 10 by 1. So it's 10 wide, 10 long, and only 1 high. Now, I'm going to increase this. If you remember, our level is 256 by 256. Mm-hmm. We could do that. We could crank it up that high if we really, really wanted to. So, but it's like I'm noticing even here at just 62 that we're starting to get really close to what we need. So, you know, just kind of start tweaking things out and seeing where the particles fall. And we're getting this nice sheet of snow.
Right. Because if you look at the way the ellipsoid works, it's actually going from the center outwards in units. So with our world being 256 units on side, if we take our ellipsoid, set it to 128, that's actually our 256.
Right. It's kind of like a radius.
Mm-hmm. If we take our transform for our particle system and set it at 128 in X and 128 in Y, that'll actually set us in the center of our world.
Oh, not 125. He actually said 128, and I can't
right.
follow directions. Now, 128 in Y is up, and then we'd need 128 in Z as well.
Right. And then if you set the Z of the ellipsoid to 128 as well,
then we should pretty much be covering
the entire extent of our terrain.
I mean, with maybe a little bit that we're losing in the corners.
Right, and that's just mostly to do with the random velocities that are set on the particles.
So now we've got our particles coming in, but this is a really light snow. Like, this is lighter than I would ever want it to be. I'm going to move it a little further down. So let's kind of deal with our problems one at a time. It's something, if you're totally new to working with particles, the number of properties involved with making a particle system do what you want is generally pretty vast. And that doesn't just go for Unity. That means, if you're doing particles in, I don't care what, it could be After Effects, it could be Maya, it could be 3ds Max, any program that has a particle system integrated, there's generally a lot of properties that drive them. And one of the things I try to teach all of my students when it comes to editing particles is solve one problem at a time. Don't try to make the perfect particle system from the word go.
Right. And along with that is you may not be able to achieve the effect you're going for with a single particle system.
That's also true. I mean, if we really wanted some really blustery snow like what you get in a blizzard, we might want to use several different snow particle emitters. One giving us the nice, great, big, fluffy flakes that come down. Another one with the little tiny powdery ones that kind of blow around and get under everything and are generally a lot more active. You
might want some particles blowing across the terrain.
Oh, yeah. And there's so many different ways, like around the edges of crags. You might have emitters that are just sitting on the edges of rocks to help it look like there's snow blowing around the edges of them. All kinds of ways to handle that sort of thing. For this demonstration, we're going to keep things really simple. So let's go ahead and make sure that, and I just hit the space bar again, so that flicker, don't worry, that was me not knowing the Alt key from the space bar. It looks like our particles are melting before they hit the ground, which is actually a pretty good description of what's going on here. The overall energy of our particles is not enough for them to live long enough to get to the ground. So I'm going to jump over here to our min and max energy. Now, if you come to this from another program such as Maya or even Max, the energy is analogous to lifespan or lifetime. It defines how long these particles are going to live. It can be confusing if you do come to this from another particle system because you think of energy and you think of motion or maybe something along the lines of something that causes them to jitter. But no, it's just how long they can live. So remember, energy is lifespan or lifetime. And instead of letting them live from 5 to 10 seconds, let's say they live from I don't know, let's just try 15 to 20. You're often going to find that working with particle systems is kind of a trial and error process. You will try out a setting, you'll see how it works. If it does work, awesome. If it doesn't work, you'll make an adjustment and get a new setting that does work. Now, if we look, our snow is hitting the ground, but that's not really all that important to me. What's important is seeing how far underneath the ground we're going, because all of this is wasted calculation. We don't need our particles to go this far down underneath our world. So we'll pull this down to, let's try 10 to 15. See where that gets us. And that might be a little bit too much pullback, but we'll see in just a second. Now we've got to give our existing particles enough time to take the change, because they're constantly being emitted. So you stall for a second.
In this case, we had it at 20 seconds, so it's going to be about 20 seconds for those first particles to completely die off.
And now we're getting to about where we want to be. So actually 15 to 20, or I'm sorry, 10 to 15 was a pretty good call. I mean, we've still got plenty of snow coming all the way down to the ground. Not all of it, but that's okay too. And you could tweak it. It's one of those things where, again, a lot of it is trial and error.
And there's nothing to say that you can't take your energy and make it 15 and 15.
No. If you don't want to have randoms at all, you could just say all particles are going to live for 15 seconds, no matter what. And that's there's no problem with doing that. All you're doing is taking the random factor out. Mm-hmm. The minimum is 15 seconds, the maximum is 15, so there's no range in between the two.
And in this case, where we're simulating snow, and you want all the snow that hit the ground, by doing this, we know that all the snowflakes will, at some point, hit the ground and pass through it, actually.
That's right. Now I'm going to hit play. And there's something we're just going to have to deal with here, and that is that when the level starts, it is not snowing. We'll start moving around and kind of doing our thing, and over the first, random, 20 seconds to 45 seconds, we're going to start seeing snowflakes appear. So it's going to be kind of like it's just starting to snow. And that's okay. I'm generally all right with that. What I wanted to kind of get a feel of, and the reason I hit play, was I wanted to get an idea of what the overall frequency of the snow is, and it's pretty thin. I mean, it's kind of nice. It really is a very light snow that's coming down. How big are the snowflakes? And really, they seemed really big a second ago, but I think they're okay. Mm-hmm. We could always make them smaller if we wanted to, but I think overall this will kind of work. I'm probably going to have to go back and get rid of a lot of rocks. That's just driving me crazy. You know what I'm saying? All right, so let's go ahead and hit play again to stop our level. Now, I'd like to see a lot more snowflakes. I don't necessarily want this to look like, a gigantic blizzard, but something a bit more than what we have. Now, we have two properties to control that. We have minimum emission and maximum emission, and that is the number of particles that can be emitted each second. And so you can get kind of a random range in there. So what I'm going to do is set this to... Let's just push it up by a factor of itself. So we'll say 50 to 75. And we'll give that a second to kind of do its thing and calculate. What we'll see is a lot more snow starting to appear up here. And then over the next 10 to 15 seconds, while I sit here and gab in your ear, we'll notice the overall density of the snow pick up. And it's starting to snow a lot more. And that doesn't look half bad. I'm going to see if we can go a little bit higher. Let's try 75 to 100.
And the cool thing about these numbers that you're messing with at this point is they're all animatable.
Oh, yeah.
So as you progress in Unity and you start learning more of the stuff, if you want your snow to go from light to heavy, you can animate that whole thing and put it on a cycle. Mm-hmm. So the entire density of your snow varies during the play of the game. It just gives you a more, kind of organic feel to it.
More control over how your game actually plays out. And then once you get even further into it and you start writing your own scripts, you can have a snowstorm be triggered by something. Mm-hmm. So that as the player is playing the game, they progress to a certain point, they make it to a certain area, and you know that as soon as they get here, you want it to start snowing for effect. Right. And so at that point, right as they make it into this area, they start seeing a few snowflakes. And suddenly it turns into a blizzard. And you can time all of that. You really are the orchestrator of your player's experience.
Right. And where you were mentioning scripts, one of the things that Zach had mentioned earlier is when we start playing, we don't get snow immediately. It takes time for the snow to come down. With the power of scripting, you actually have the ability to pre-render or pre-calculate your particle system. So the moment you start playing the game, there's already particles in the world.
Right, that's not something we can explore here.
No, it's something that's only exposed in scripting.
Yeah, it's it's a little outside the scope of our means, but let's go ahead and hit play. And we'll give this about 15 seconds, 20 seconds, give or take, for the first bits of snow to start coming down. And there's the first little flakes of it. And there we go. So now it should be just about everywhere. So it's not bad. I mean, I think we could go a bit heavier with it, but I'm going to kind of leave that up to the viewer. If you'd like to put more snow in there, you can take those settings and crank them up to whatever you want. At some point, your computer will eventually slow down and start complaining that there's too much going on, but you've got a lot of room left. So let's go ahead and hit stop. Okay, there's a couple of things I want to do. First off, I'm sorry. It's driving me absolutely out of my mind. I'm going to take just a second, jump into our terrain system. We're going to grab our little rock brush, and there's some rocks I have to get rid of. I mean, all these things up here on the hard slopes where we can see underneath them, it's killing me. It's just killing me. So I hate to diverge too far away from our lesson plan, but it's like seeing them is really just, no, it can't happen right now. So I'm going to do a mass rock deletion around pretty much everywhere that isn't the hot springs for now, just so I can't accidentally see up underneath a rock anymore. Okay, now with that done, I feel a whole lot better. And let's take one more quick look at our snow. And
let's just go from 100 to 150.
Yeah, let's just try it. Well, even that. Let's try going from 150 to 200.
Oh, nice heavy snow.
Yeah, let's just really push this.
Now, do you want to add some fog to it and give it a little bit?
I do want to add fog, but we're actually going to save that for a separate thing after we get the weather effects in. And then that'll really start adding some nice ambiance to the look of our level. I didn't even really want to branch out and take away those rocks, but I also didn't want to have a separate video over just erasing some rocks, and they were just driving me crazy. So let's see. There we go. Now we're starting to get some really heavy snow. It's getting to the point where, I mean, you could almost hear it, And when you're outside on a really snowy day, and if you listen real close, you can kind of hear it hitting the ground. So, all right, let's go ahead and play test. And, of course, we got to give it a few moments. In the meantime, I'll run around because I can't sit still very well. And here we go.
Yeah, it's awesome. We got a snowstorm with a lens flare.
I know, isn't it perfect? I mean, you never see that in nature, but we can go so far beyond nature.
I know, now we need some God rays coming down.
We do. And with like some sort of angelic music when you look up. Oh, be great. Okay, so we've got our snow, and I think I'm happy with the overall look of it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to wrap up our video. There's nothing else I really need to show at this point. The last thing, I mean, I'm just going to take one quick peek. Are there any other settings we really need to play with? And the answer is not really. The particles are being animated just fine. I'm cool with that. They're rotating and flipping around, doing everything they need to do. If your particles felt a little bit too small or a little bit too big, it's fairly obvious. You got a min size and a max size if you want to change the size of your snowflakes. Most of the other different settings I wasn't really going to mess with too much. I will throw this out there. If you don't want your particles to look like they're falling straight down, you can add a little bit of side kind of blow some wind to them.
I was going to ask if you wanted to duplicate and add a little bit of wind to one of them.
Well, we could just do it to all of them at once and just say there's a gentle wind kind of hitting everything and keep it relatively simple. Let's take our world velocity, and just to kind of show how this works, we'll just jump in like a random number of 5. And we may not even really be able to see too much of an effect. There we go. It's going to be in only the new particles. The old particles won't get it imparted to them. And so now everything is falling kind of sideways. So it's like there's a little bit of a wind blowing. What were you going to say?
I was going to say go to random velocity and add, say, 2 there.
Yeah. Now there's already a little bit of random velocity in X of about 2.
Yeah, so bump that up to, say, 4.
5.
Okay, 5.
Oh, we'll do 4. And somehow this got 4 as well. Okay, no, it's just a draw issue.
So basically all we're doing is now there's a little bit of wind coming from the x-axis.
And it's not hitting everybody the same.
Right. So it looks like it's a little gusty.
Yeah, there's got a little bit of turbulence to it. But now, the particles are no longer falling straight down, which does make them a lot more visually interesting. And that is going to be everything I really wanted to show here, is just how to get the snow in place. So that'll wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.